It was just another ordinary afternoon at the park. The sun was high in the sky, casting its warm glow on the green grass, and people were out enjoying the perfect weather. I was sitting on a bench, flipping through a book, trying to drown out the usual noise of kids playing nearby. That was when I saw him, a young boy, maybe 12 or 13, with a backpack slung over his shoulder. He was walking across the grass, his head down, lost in thought. I didn't pay him much attention at first. But then, I heard the woman's voice. "Excuse me. Hey, you." She was standing not far from me, her voice sharp and demanding. I glanced up and saw a middle-aged woman pointing at the boy, her face flushed with anger. She was practically vibrating with irritation, staring down at him with an expression I couldn't quite place. The boy stopped in his tracks, confused. "Don't you dare walk across my lawn like that," she shouted, stepping closer to him. "Who do you think you are?" I was a little taken aback. I hadn't seen anything unusual, but from the way she was acting, it seemed like this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. The boy looked scared, his hands clutched tightly around his backpack straps, but he didn't move. "Ma'am, I'm just walking through," he said softly, his voice barely audible. "That's not the point," she snapped, her face growing redder. "This is private property, and you have no right to walk on it. You need to leave now, or I'm calling the police." She reached for her phone, but the boy didn't budge. His expression was calm, but his eyes betrayed his unease. I felt a rush of sympathy for him, but there was something I didn't know at that moment. Something that would change everything. I watched the woman dial on her phone, her fingers trembling with a mix of frustration and what I assumed was a sense of superiority. She muttered under her breath as she waited for the line to connect. I could feel the tension in the air, both in the way she stood and in the boy's stiff posture. There was an uncomfortable silence that hung between them, broken only by the faint murmur of voices from the nearby playground. The boy's eyes flickered toward me, and for a moment, I thought he was going to speak again. But instead, he just shook his head slightly, almost as if he was trying to tell himself that it wasn't worth arguing. "You're really calling the police over this?" I couldn't help but ask, my voice louder than I intended. I hadn't meant to get involved, but something about the way she was acting didn't sit right with me. The woman shot me a glance, her sharp eyes narrowing. "Yes, I am. This is ridiculous. Kids like him think they can just walk all over people's property without any consequences. It's about time someone teaches them a lesson." I felt my stomach churn. What was she implying? Just as she finished speaking, the call went through. She began explaining the situation to the dispatcher, her voice getting louder with each word. But in the middle of her tirade, something unexpected happened. The boy, still standing there, began to slowly pull his phone from his pocket. For a brief second, I thought he was texting someone, maybe trying to reach his parents. But then, as if on cue, his voice rang out with a level of calm authority I hadn't expected. "Actually," he said, his voice unwavering, "you might want to check your records before you make that call." The woman faltered, her phone still pressed to her ear. "What?" she said, her eyebrows shooting up in surprise. The boy didn't flinch. "You're calling the police on me, but you should know, my mother is the mayor of this city." The woman froze. Her hand trembled slightly, and I could see the color draining from her face. There was a long pause before she stammered, trying to regain her composure. No, I didn't," she started, but she was cut off. The boy didn't give her the chance to finish. "I'll have her call you later if you'd like. But I'd advise against that. It's not going to look good on you." The woman stood there, her phone still pressed to her ear, but her words were gone. She didn't know how to respond. Her face was a mix of disbelief and embarrassment, her earlier confidence evaporating like mist in the morning sun. The boy stood firm, his expression still calm, though there was an unmistakable glint of pride in his eyes. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I could see the wheels turning in the woman's head as she processed what had just been said. She looked at the boy, then at me, then back at the boy, as if trying to piece everything together. Finally, she lowered her phone. I didn't know, she muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. Her voice had lost the sharp edge it had when she first confronted him. The boy simply nodded. I'm sure you didn't. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt for the way I had initially judged the woman, assuming she was just acting out of some misplaced frustration. But now, I realized it wasn't just about her lawn. It was about something deeper, something that the boy had the power to control. The kind of power that comes from being the child of someone in a position of authority. She hesitated for a moment, glancing between us, then muttered a quick apology. I didn't mean any harm. I thought, her voice trailed off, and she turned to walk away, leaving the boy standing there. It was as if the whole confrontation had deflated her, and all that was left was a hollow shell of the person who had been so eager to call the police just moments before. As she walked off, I caught the boy's eye again. He didn't look smug or victorious, just calm. A little tired, maybe, but assured in a way that made me think he had been through this more times than anyone should have to. Are you okay? I asked, feeling the need to offer him some kind of support. He nodded. Yeah, I'm fine. Just another day. The way he said it made my heart sink. This wasn't just a one-time incident. He had likely dealt with this kind of thing before. Maybe not the exact same situation, but people making assumptions based on the way he looked. It was something he was used to, something he'd learned to handle with quiet dignity. Good, I said, standing up from the bench. But just know that you shouldn't have to put up with people like that. No one should. He gave me a small smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. Thanks. But I've learned it's easier to just keep walking. The woman had disappeared into the crowd, leaving the park eerily quiet again. The tension that had lingered in the air was starting to dissipate, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than I had seen. I glanced at the boy, watching him stand there with a quiet composure that seemed to shield him from whatever judgments others might throw his way. As we both stood there, the soft rustling of leaves in the trees and distant laughter from a group of children playing basketball were the only sounds. The boy looked over at me, his gaze thoughtful. You know, he began, his voice low, she probably didn't realize what she was doing. It's not just about me, you know. It's about the way people sometimes think they can just assume things. About me, about anyone who looks different. I nodded, understanding his point. The whole situation had escalated so quickly because of assumptions, the way the woman had assumed he didn't belong there, or the way she thought she could just enforce her rules without question. And the sad truth was, it wasn't the first time people had made similar assumptions. It was just another day in the life of a young black boy who didn't fit into the narrow expectations others had of him. I get it, I said, offering him a sympathetic smile. People really do make a lot of assumptions based on how we look. It's not right. He shrugged, as if he had come to terms with it. It happens. You just have to learn to keep going. I watched him for a moment, wondering how someone so young could already be so wise in the face of such adversity. He wasn't angry, he wasn't bitter, he was just accepting. But I knew that acceptance came at a cost. It wasn't something anyone should have to learn at his age. Does it happen often? I asked, almost hesitantly, unsure if I was pushing too far. He glanced at me, his eyes softening for a second before returning to their calm, guarded nature. More often than you think. People like her, they don't realize that when they judge, when they assume, they're hurting someone. But it's just the way things are sometimes. I felt a surge of frustration, a quiet rage at how society had conditioned people to make judgments based on skin color, background, or any other superficial trait. But the boy was right, what was he supposed to do? What could anyone do in the face of that kind of ignorance? Before I could respond, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out quickly, glancing at the screen. The look on his face shifted, less guarded now, and more, relieved. "It's her," he said, a small grin creeping onto his face. "My mom. Looks like I'm in trouble." I raised an eyebrow, a little confused. "In trouble?" He chuckled softly. "For not calling her first, obviously." And just like that, his mood seemed to lighten. His mother, the mayor, was on the other end of the line, probably already hearing about the incident. I couldn't help but smile at how easily the boy seemed to shake off the tension of the situation. "Go ahead, take the call," I said. "I'm sure she's worried." As he answered, I couldn't help but wonder just how much more of this he would face in his lifetime, and how much longer it would take before the world would finally wake up and stop making assumptions based on the color of someone's skin. The boy stood there, holding his phone to his ear, his expression shifting as he spoke to his mother. I couldn't hear the conversation, but from the way he chuckled a few times and nodded thoughtfully, I could tell it was less about the incident and more about him reassuring her. I imagined she'd heard about what happened by now. News like that would travel fast, especially considering her position. As he ended the call, he slipped the phone back into his pocket, looking a little more at ease. "She's mad at me for not calling her sooner," he said with a grin. "But she'll be fine. I just told her the situation got out of hand." I couldn't help but admire the way he handled it all. Even with the tension, the anger from the woman, and the constant feeling of being judged, he didn't let it rattle him for long. He didn't seem to carry that weight on his shoulders like so many others might. It was as if he had learned, maybe not just from his mother but from years of experience, how to stand his ground without letting others see his vulnerability. "That sounds like something she'd say," I said, shaking my head in amusement. "Yeah," he said, his smile widening. "She's a tough one. She doesn't like it when I let stuff like this slide. But, it's not always worth making a big deal out of." I could see the wisdom in his words, but something about that felt wrong. "But should you have to let it slide?" I asked. "I mean, you're right. You shouldn't have to let people walk all over you. You deserve better than that." He paused, his smile fading slightly. "Yeah, I know. But sometimes making a scene makes things worse. Not everyone is gonna see things my way. My mom. She's been trying to change the way people think. She's always working on it. But I'm just a kid. I can't change everything." The weight of his words hung in the air, and I felt a sense of helplessness. How could one person, one child, even, change such deeply ingrained mindsets? But then again, I reminded myself, change doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes, it comes in quiet, steady moments like this one, when the boy stood tall and let his own actions speak louder than anyone's assumptions. "Maybe you can't change the world overnight," I said gently. "But the way you handle things, it matters more than you might think. You're already making a difference by just being you." He looked at me then, as if weighing my words. For a split second, his eyes softened, and I saw a flash of something, hope, maybe, or at least the idea that things could get better. "You really think so?" he asked, his voice a little softer now. "Absolutely," I said without hesitation. "It's not always the big fights that make a difference. Sometimes, it's the way you handle the small ones. The way you carry yourself when things get tough. That's what leaves an impact." He nodded slowly, his shoulders relaxing just a bit more. "I'll remember that." Before I could respond, a car pulled up at the edge of the park, and I recognized the driver instantly, a sleek black SUV that seemed out of place among the regular parkgoers. The tinted windows rolled down, and a familiar figure stepped out, his mother, the mayor. She was everything the boy had described and more. Tall, confident, her movements purposeful as she strode toward us. Even from this distance, I could sense the presence she carried, the weight of her office, her ambition, her fight for change. She was a woman who knew what it meant to stand her ground. As the mayor approached, the atmosphere seemed to shift. The boy stood up a little straighter, almost instinctively. There was no sign of the tense situation that had unfolded just moments before. Instead, the woman who stepped out of the SUV was a figure of calm, control, and authority, a stark contrast to the woman who had called the police moments earlier. Her eyes swept over the park, taking in the scene before landing on her son. She walked up to him and placed a hand on his shoulder, looking down at him with a warm, but commanding, expression. There was a quiet strength in her posture that spoke volumes about who she was, not just as a mother, but as a leader. "You all right?" she asked, her voice low and steady. He nodded, a small grin on his face. "I'm fine, Mom. Just another day." She glanced at me then, giving me a polite nod of acknowledgement, but her attention quickly returned to her son. "I heard what happened. You did well, handling it." He shrugged, still trying to downplay it. "It wasn't a big deal." The mayor's gaze softened, but there was still a flicker of something sharp in her eyes. "It was a big deal. But that's why I'm proud of you. You didn't let it escalate, even though you had every right to. People like her, they have a lot to learn." Her words, though gentle, held a weight. I could tell that this wasn't the first time she'd had to address something like this, either with her son or in her public life. It was obvious that she fought battles every day, not just as a politician, but as a mother trying to protect her child from a world that wasn't always fair. "Maybe, next time," she continued, her eyes lingering on her son's face, "you'll call me before it gets out of hand. We don't want to give anyone the chance to misread a situation." The boy rolled his eyes, but there was no real annoyance behind it. "You're right. I'll do that next time." I couldn't help but smile at the dynamic between them. Despite the tension in the air, there was a warmth to their relationship, an unspoken understanding that, no matter what, they had each other's backs. The mayor turned to me then, her professional demeanor slipping just slightly to reveal a genuine warmth in her expression. "I'm sorry you had to witness that," she said, her tone sincere. "My son is stronger than most people realize, but I'm sure that doesn't make things easier for him." I shook my head, feeling a mixture of admiration and sadness. "I think he handled it better than most adults would have." She smiled, the pride in her eyes unmistakable. "That's because he knows what it means to stand firm. But every time something like this happens, I know it's a reminder of how much more we need to do." I didn't need her to explain what she meant, I could see it clearly. The boy's actions were a small victory in a larger battle, one she fought every day in her position as the mayor. It was clear that they both carried the weight of change on their shoulders, and it was a weight that wouldn't be lifted easily. But maybe, just maybe, it could be lightened by the quiet acts of resilience and courage that people like them showed in the face of adversity. "You've got a good kid," I said, meeting her eyes with a quiet sense of respect. "The world could use more people like him." Her smile widened, though there was a touch of sadness behind it. "I wish it were that simple. But thank you. We're doing the best we can." As they turned to leave, I watched them walk together toward the SUV. The boy's posture had relaxed even more, the tension from earlier completely gone. And the mayor, though still the formidable figure of authority, had softened in her presence, just a little bit. Maybe change didn't always happen overnight. But I could see now that it wasn't always about the big battles. Sometimes, it was the quiet strength of individuals like this mother and son that made the biggest difference. As they got into the SUV and drove away, the park seemed to return to its normal rhythm. The sounds of children laughing, the hum of distant conversations, and the rustling of leaves in the wind filled the air again. But something had shifted in me. I couldn't shake the feeling that what I had witnessed was more than just an interaction between a woman and a boy, it was a snapshot of a larger story, one that was still unfolding every day for so many people. I sat back down on the bench, the weight of the moment settling in. I had seen how quickly assumptions could spiral into something far more serious, and how people often didn't realize the power they held with their words and actions. But I also saw something else, resilience. Strength. A quiet but steady defiance against the forces that tried to keep people in their place. I thought about the boy's calm response, the way he didn't let the woman's anger rattle him. He was used to being misunderstood, even if he didn't deserve it. And I thought about his mother, the mayor, who not only had to protect her son but was fighting a battle every day to change the system. Their lives were shaped by the struggles of others' prejudices, but instead of crumbling under it, they were using it as fuel to push forward. It wasn't fair, of course. No one should have to fight for respect simply because of who they were or how they looked. But sometimes, that's the reality. And maybe, just maybe, the fight was worth it. Not for just one person, but for all the people who would come after. As I left the park, I found myself thinking about the boy and his mother. I didn't know what the future would hold for them, but I knew one thing for sure: they were not people who would back down. They had learned too much, fought too hard, and had far too much at stake. The fight wasn't over, but it was in capable hands.